Tobin.
Thank you, my lady. Mr. Johnson, may I turn then to a completely different subject, which is that of the closure of schools as announced on the 4th of January 2021. You must have been really keen to ensure that the calamitous closure of schools as occurred in March 2020 wasn't repeated again. Would that be right?
Absolutely. It was the last thing I wanted to do, of course.
And Miss Susan Ackland Hood has given evidence that over the course of December, two things happened. First of all, that there was an increasing ask on the Department for Education in terms of the amount of testing that it would have to ensure was provided. Do you recollect that?
Yes, absolutely. And that was very much in the context of the period at the second half of 2020, when we started to get very interested in mass testing as a way of reopening settings, schools and other things. And it's absolutely correct that I wanted to see mass testing in schools as part of the way of getting schools open.
And I think what she gave evidence of was a very specific set of increases in the ask that was being made of the Department for Education, which in turn became the ask being made of schools. Do you recollect that?
I do, and I remember that it wasn't easy, and I think that the department, again, I think the department acquitted themselves heroically in this respect. I think they really tried to get mass testing going. I think they stood up a huge amount of facilities very, very fast. But as I'm sure you're coming to, that it was just never going to be a runner because of the Alpha, the Kent variant.
I'll turn to that. The other point that she made and developed in her evidence was that in terms of the manpower to provide the testing, that it became clear that that would also have to be provided, as it were, largely by the Department for Education, but in reality it would have to be provided by schools. Again, does that accord with your memory?
It does, and I was conscious of the extra burden we were putting on teachers, and it's as you know, the way the schools work in this country, what the man and woman in Whitehall says doesn't necessarily follow everywhere, and it's a very complicated system. But on the whole, the schools did stand up a quite extraordinary amount of testing capability.
So, Mr. Johnson, we've heard the Department for Education perspective on the events leading up to the 4th of January, and we've heard the perspective of Professor Sir Chris Whitty as well. I think it's important that the inquiry also hears your evidence about your perspective on it. But can I take you, and just to set the scene, to a document that we have at INQ 0009 1147. This wasn't a document addressed to you, Mr. Johnson, because it was the chair's brief for this COVID-0 meeting of the 16th of December 2020. But we can see underneath the introduction that you had given a strong steer that you would like the return to face-to-face attendance to be staggered and for testing to be used as fully as possible to support this. Yes?
Yes.
And if we look at the last bullet in that sequence, that we are all well aware that this is a major delivery challenge, correct?
Yes.
And I think if we go over the page, please, to the background, and if we look at the second bullet, it records that the Education Secretary had spoken to you that morning, that there had been agreement about who would go back and the testing in place. And then beneath that there were significant delivery challenges, correct?
Yes.
And it says at the bottom of that paragraph, the biggest issue to resolve is workforce. There is not yet agreement as to where this will come from, teaching, military, other surge workforce, etc. And therefore the Department of Health and Social Care Secretary of State didn't want to put his name to the paper, correct? Do you remember that there was...
I remember the difficulties in standing up the testing operation. And I remember the department really straining to get it done. But what I also remember is that in the end, I think they were in a position to deliver. I remember though I can't remember the ins and outs of it. I remember a conversation about the MACA and whether we'd use the army or not. But I think it ended up with the schools doing it.
And do you recollect the tensions at this time between the Secretary of State for Health and the Secretary of State for Education in terms of trying to resolve where this manpower would come from?
I'm sorry, I don't remember the specifics of that.
All right, and I think if we go to the position that was reached then on the 28th of December, and we have this at INQ 000075504. And again, Mr. Johnson, just to help with your memory of this, we can see that this is an email of the 28th of December.
28th, right.
Yes, yeah. From a Miss Burns from number 10. And obviously by this stage, it's very clear, isn't it, that the new variant was what was driving transmission, correct?
Yes, that's right. I mean, the documents I've just looked at to refresh my memory suggested that really the penny sort of started to drop on the 22nd, but yes, I think it was very clear by the 28th.
All right. And if we look at the second paragraph below those first set of bullets, that the Education Secretary had set out the social cost of closing schools. And then below that we see again the 4 bullets for getting schools back, yes?
Yes.
And we can see here the plan set out that in terms of secondary schools that there would be a delay until the 18th of January to get all of the children back.
Yes.
And then that there would be the weekly testing of of pupils, yes?
Yes. Is this the 28th still?
It is, yes. And I think if we go over the page, please. This is quite a long section, Mr. Johnson, and I won't read all of it out. But I think we can see here some of the different arguments being ventilated. So the first part of that page, we can see set out the Secretary of State for Health's arguments. Yes?
Yes.
So that it would be that the 18th of January might be too soon and seeking a clear decision at this point. Yes?
Yes.
And is that right? Was he effectively arguing that a decision ought to be made as or around that date as to whether or not schools should in fact reopen in the January?
Look, I think you can generally take it during this period that there's... I can't remember the specifics about the issue on testing between DFE and Department of Health, but there's generally a tension about, whether it's going to be sensible to open up and how fast, or as soon as we see the Kent variant, the Alpha variant, and I don't remember Matt saying that, but it seems entirely plausible.
Okay, and if we just read this down, and if we drop down a couple of paragraphs, we can see reference to the advice that was being given by the Chief Scientific Advisor. And if we follow that down by a couple of sentences, he was advising, we know that children do transmit and take it back into households, and that when half-term occurs, there is a decrease in spread, so advising that school closures do have an effect, correct?
Yes. So why are we talking about half-term now? Because we got Christmas.
I think he's talking about retrospectively it can be seen that half-term has an effect.
Yes, right.
And then after that, we can also see the advice being provided by the Chief Medical Officer as well, who was also advising that it was regional differences at this point in time that was making the decision difficult, correct?
That looks the kind of, yes, I mean, I'm sure that's right.
But may I just focus then on the last paragraph of this section? In conclusion, the Prime Minister understood the DFE proposal and thought that mass testing proposal sounded positive, although overall he could also see the arguments for having a lower risk appetite on opening. Decisions would need to be taken in the round this week. And then we can see set out in the meantime on schools specifically, he would like to urgently see the delivery plan on testing in every school for the start of term, as well as understanding the precise policy, i.e. are we compelling individual schools, how, what's the form of words he could use, and whether weekly testing is deliverable, and what could be done to make that happen. And then we can see, please can the DFE provide a note on the above, working with test and trace for 6:30 p.m. And I think we can see that that email was sent by 3:30, was sent at 3:30 p.m. So again, does that correspond with your memory, Mr. Johnson, that even as at this date,
what date is this now?
28th of December, that there wasn't a clear plan as far as you were concerned for testing in schools, and that you were still seeking clarification as to what such a plan would look like?
Yes, I think I was seeking clarification, but I don't think that that meant that I thought that it was undeliverable. I mean, my impression was that they were making progress and that they were going to be able to stand up testing. And I maybe I'm wrong. I think that was the testimony of Mrs. Ackland Hood as well, but I might be wrong about that.
Well, I'm just testing at the moment what your understanding was on the 28th of December, because some of the questions that seem to be asked by you at this point seem like quite fundamental questions.
Sure, and quite rightly, but I don't. All I'm trying to say is, from the best of my memory, that doesn't mean that I thought that the plan was necessarily undeliverable. You know, I wanted to make sure that we belt and braced it, that it was all ready to go, but I wasn't going to junk it.
And can you help with why at this point? I mean, it very much appears to be the case, and borne out by what Miss Ackland Hood explained, that this massive effort was very much on the shoulders of the Department for Education and schools, as opposed to being a more shared effort. Why was it? Why had it fallen principally to the department and to schools to deliver this massive?
Well, they had to test.
Regime.
They had to test secondary school kids going back into secondary school, which was going to be, you know, I think we had a plan to stagger that anyway. I didn't think it was such an unreasonable thing to ask. I know it was onerous, but I believe they could do it given the alternative. And the alternative was again more loss of learning, greater detriment to their pupils, about which they cared passionately, and as did we all.
Yes, but Miss Ackland's had evidence about that was that she felt they were asking something deeply unreasonable of schools. You know, in other words, the teachers were there to teach the children. They weren't there to implement a mass testing regime in secondary schools, although her evidence is that nonetheless schools rose to the challenge.
I think they did.
And I think, again, it's coming back to the point, Mr. Johnson, about the importance that was attached to this or not by government in terms of getting children back to school.
Well, I think huge importance was attached to it, and that's why we kept going with the policy in spite of the obvious difficulties. And if you look at we were in an environment where the numbers of cases were starting to rise quite sharply, and I also knew, of course, that we were going to have the vaccines coming down the track at some point. It seemed to me that this was, I knew it was a huge effort, but it was worth it just to get the kids back in school. And if we could use my plan was to try to use mass testing as I told the inquiry before, as a way to try to reopen society. And in the end, that didn't work, and it was superseded by the vaccines. But in the second half of 2020, that was the only shot we had. Mass testing was the only way through for the country that I could see, and so that was why it was so important. Now, should the DHSC have done it? Should the army have done it? Should some other body have done it to relieve the pressure on teachers and schools? Very possibly. I can't, I'm afraid, now go into the arguments, because I simply can't at this stage recollect them. I can imagine that health and social care staff were very heavily engaged doing other things, as were the others. But I can't give you the balance of the arguments now. We had to, if we could stand up testing in schools, we had to do it if we possibly could, and that was the plan. We were beaten by Alpha.
And may I ask you, were you satisfied ultimately that the plans for schools, despite the enormous ask of teachers, were you satisfied that they were sufficiently robust? That they
the plans for testing?
Yes, that they did have a chance. I mean, obviously that changed, but in terms of the plans that you had asked for and the increased ask, were you satisfied that the Department for Education was in the position of being able to deliver that?
My memory is I had confidence in them and in what they were doing. It's clear from those questions that I'm pushing them so that I'm going to be in a position to get, because the public will be extremely interested and concerned to hear about their kids being tested in school. They're going to want to know who's in charge, how it works, and all sorts of things. I need to know the details. So I think that's why I'm asking those questions. I'm going to have to explain it.
Yes, but you're asking the really basic question of can we actually do weekly testing in schools?
Yes, and I think the answer was yes, but it was tough. But many of the things that we faced in COVID were extremely tough.
And was the position reached then once again that you were effectively overtaken by events? Because on the 30th of December, in fact, you had to start closing primary schools in different parts of England.
It was an absolute, of all the really, really low moments it was terrible, that whole period, because, I could see the cavalry coming over the hill in the form of the vaccines. I thought mass testing offered a way forward, but it was clear that the January spike, I think, was bigger than the April spike of 2020, and that plan to open on January the 4th, staggered, was defeated by Alpha.
Was it the worst of all worlds then that some primary schools around the country opened on the 4th of January only to have to close again that day because of the reversal of position? Yes,
but it was, and I'm very sorry to them for their efforts that were in vain. The inquiry was asking, I'm sure you are, about were there other options we could have used then at any stage to reduce the R other than closing schools? Was that really the right tool to use? Looking back, honestly, I'm not certain, but at the time, it seemed like the only option. If the risk was, if we had another doubling, we would see a very serious number of fatalities, and then another doubling. And we had to get the R below 1. I think that's what people sometimes forget, why something, a relatively small thing like closing schools can take the speed out of the circulation and make all the difference. 'Cause otherwise, sorry.
No, sorry, I was interrupting you. Sorry.
Well, no, but otherwise, mathematically, it either doubles or halves.
That I certainly follow. Mr. Johnson, can I ask, why was it that the decision had to wait, so that to close had to wait? In other words, they opened, the primary schools opened 4th of January and then closed that night. Could the decision not have been taken earlier, that you were forced to close?
I'm sure, look, with hindsight, my lady, of course it could have been taken earlier, and it would have looked better and have felt less bumpy to everybody had it been taken earlier. Of course, that's right. But at the time, it wasn't as obvious to me as it seems now. At the time, I was still very much divided and very, very keen, as indeed was Gavin Williamson, to see if we could keep going.
Just turning to Sir Gavin Williamson, what he sets out in his witness statement, and perhaps we can just bring this up for ease. It's at INQ 000 588 024, please. Page 83 and paragraph 10.26. Just to highlight, Mr. Johnson, I think the point about how 11th hour this decision actually was. His evidence is that when he spoke to you on the morning of the 4th of January 2021, your message to him was about keeping schools open and doing everything to ensure that that remained the position, and that he explained that something like 85% of schools had actually opened. So in other words, saying...
looking at that, I can understand how a Secretary of State would feel frustrated. Of course, I totally understand that, and it was a very, very difficult situation, and we had to take decisions throughout the pandemic based on our best judgment of the way things were at the time, and that inevitably changed, and that was the day, sadly, when it became clear to me that we couldn't continue with a policy of opening the schools. Now, maybe it should have occurred to me, maybe I should have resolved that earlier in my mind, but that's easy to say with hindsight. I wondered if I possibly could to keep them open.
If we just look, please, at what he says just after that, please, at paragraph 10.27, he says that he receives a phone call from Mr. Rosenfield at 12:30 that day to tell him that, in fact, schools would close. So I think, Mr. Johnson, to come full circle on the point that was made at the very start of your evidence, and this question of whether or not the Department for Education was at the table when some of these most significant decisions were made, I think we see here that they weren't at the table and that you told him that schools would close. That is right, isn't it?
Yes, and that's absolutely right. And I think you're looking at the reality of the way things have to run in government, and particularly during a pandemic. Gavin rightly owned the interests of schools and young people. He had to promote that. I had the problem of trying to balance the interests of the entire country and every single potential COVID victim. And it was hellishly difficult. And of course, I think Gavin has said, I think my instincts were, my inclinations were very much the same as his, but in the end, we had to take the public health issue into account, and we had to put it first. I'm sorry, but we had to put it first.
So if we just, in terms of going to the meeting where the decision was made, then we have that at INQ 000146739, please. And I think that we can see from the top of this that it's the 4th of January and it's the COVID-0 meeting. Is that right?
It sounds right, yes.
And we can see that those present are Sir Michael Gove, the Chancellor, and the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care, correct?
Yes.
And various officials. And I
Yes.
think that if we go over the page then, please, to page 4. And I think it's the penultimate paragraph, Mr. Johnson. We can see here the Director General for Strategy in the COVID-19 Task Force said that there were big choices for the Committee on Schools. Yes, so returning to the question of whether schools should reopen after the 18th of January, yes? That's secondary schools, correct?
Yeah. Yes.
And I think as well, if we look in terms of the things that were discussed during that meeting, if we look at B, for example, so in discussion, sorry, it's page 5. It sets out all of the things that were discussed. And for example, we see at B, it was always better to surprise on the upside rather than the downside. Therefore, government should act quickly and robustly to close all schools. Further on down, there was mass flagrant abuse of the rules, and unless measures taken were even tougher than in March, they would not be taken seriously. Yes?
Yes, I don't remember that particular intervention, but that does not surprise me at all.
And then a few paragraphs down from this paragraph E, any intervention would only be successful if it succeeded in changing public behaviour, yes?
Yes.
And then the reference there underneath it, G, that deaths had increased by 25% within a week, yes? So
Yeah.
the stark public health issue that you had to confront, correct?
Correct.
And then if we go over the page, please, to H, the suggestion that schools could resume face-to-face learning for all students at the end of January, from the February half term, or from the end of February, yes.
Right. Yes. Yes.
And I don't think we need to go through the whole of this document, but it is right, isn't it, that at the end of this meeting you then decided that you would close schools to all children once again, correct?
Yes. Yes. I think that's right. This is the 4th of.
Yes, it
yes,
is.
absolutely. Yes.
And it obviously fits in with what Sir Gavin Williamson has said, that he spoke to you first thing in the morning when it was, your message was, yes, schools are staying open, full steam ahead, so to speak, only for him to be told a couple of hours later that that was no longer the case, yes?
That's correct.
And that this was the meeting that happened in between to change the direction of travel, yes?
There I'm not certain, but it looks,
fits
there
with
would be plenty of discussions going on throughout the day and people bringing me bits of information, but that could well be how it happened. Yes, I just can't remember.
But I think, Mr. Johnson, from everything you've said, you didn't see any issue about taking this decision on the 4th of January without having the Department for Education at the table to speak to any of these issues about education or when schools might be able to reopen or any of the other issues that were relevant.
If you look at so I'd spent the day in contact with Gavin, I think by our own account of this thing. This day, I'm talking to him in the morning. I'm well aware of his position. I'm well aware of his concerns, and we've been talking about it the whole time, continuously. And as I said, I shared his instincts and understood very much what his message was. There was no need for I didn't need to to hear him directly in my ear to understand what he would feel about this. But it was clear to me that because of Alpha, the balance of the argument had shifted, and I could have. I had no option. I had no option given the facts as they presented themselves that day. I felt I had no option but to close down and or to prevent the reopening of schools. Imagine the kind of factual. Imagine, well, you know, there's no need for me to go through it.
Mr. Johnson, Sir Gavin Williamson has been very critical of the decisions to close schools on the 4th of January.
And I understand why he feels as he does. And he's, you know, people are. He was the Secretary of State for Education. He wanted to see kids in school, and that's entirely laudable.
I mean, what he has said is that the decision was made, and I'm paraphrasing, but I hope accurately, that the decision was made not because it would have a significant impact on the infection rate, but more because the government had to be seen to be using all possible options to turn things around.
Well, again, I respectfully disagree, because although the schools themselves might make up a small part of the budget of measures that you need to press the R, it can be critical, and the problem with bringing the schools back, as everybody knows, is that there's a delay. Because of when the virus starts circulating in schools, there's a delay between the kids contracting it and then passing it on, and then the adults being infected, and so you're storing up potentially very, very big problems. And I think I understand his frustration, and it's a proper frustration on the part of a Secretary of State with a department to run, who's thinking about kids and their interests.
He said that it had, and I mean the closure of schools in January 2021 was likened to smashing a Ming vase on the floor. So in other words, that you had to do something, you had to make a bold move and something dramatic in order to get the public.
We had to stop a second doubling of a doubling of the wave. I think the paper we've just been looking at said there'd been a 25% increase in deaths overnight. I think I may have got that wrong. You can't ignore that sort of data.
And again, I'm putting the criticisms, Mr. Johnson, he makes, but he said that it was a panic decision, and that it wasn't required.
Well, you know, I respectfully disagree. It grieved everybody to have to do it. It's the last thing I wanted to do. But the numbers were very difficult to argue with.
Can I ask, as far as you were concerned, in January 21, was there a direct causative link between closing schools and reducing the R number? Or was it the effect of closing schools on the public messaging, which seemed to be what one of the papers...
The Ming vase point?
Yeah.
No, I think it was... well, I mean, obviously it was...
Was it both?
It was both. But as I understood it, the schools alone could take about 10 or 20% out of the R. So if the R is 1.1, that obviously gets you halving rather than doubling, and that's a critical thing.
Thank you.
Mr. Johnson, I think from everything you have said, that you accept that these periods of school closure had the most awful impact on all children in England of school age, and also more a disproportionate impact on those most disadvantaged children in our society. And it was for that reason, wasn't it, that you appointed Sir Kevin Collins as Educational Recovery Commissioner, is that right?
Yeah.
Just before we go on to his to your evidence about his appointment and his recovery plan, I just wanted to refer to an account that was given to the inquiry in its Every Story Matters piece of work. And this was selected because, on the one hand, it's probably a story that isn't that out of the ordinary for many young people, but
I read it. It's about the footballer.
Yes.
Yes.
I'm just going to, maybe if we bring that up on screen, please. But the parent who set out, my eldest son was expected to get scouted at 16 by a football club, but lockdown started shortly after his 16th birthday. After many months without intense training, his fitness and skills dropped, and he feels he was robbed of the chance to make it. This caused him to become depressed. Along with having missed his school leaving, GCSEs being ruined, not seeing his girlfriend, and all his social life being put to an end, his depression levels started to rise. One evening in July 2020, I got a call from his friend's mum saying he was threatening to attempt suicide and had gone out at 2 a.m. to a wood. Thankfully, he had told his friend, who went out to find him, and we quickly sought mental health support privately. So there are probably many stories like that across England, but extraordinary for the family who finds themselves in that situation, yes.
Terrible, yes.
And the impacts, obviously, there were educational impacts, but the impacts went far, far beyond that, didn't they?
They did, and it was one of the reasons, whether the main reason, why I was so deeply reluctant to go with school closures throughout the time, because after the first lockdown, I went to see a school in. I saw several, but I remember going to one in Kent and talking to the kids. It was obvious that some had been fine, and some had been very far from fine. And I'd say the most had been fine, but a significant number of kids were very badly affected by this thing, and it was very difficult to remediate. And we did our best as I've said out in my statement.
Do you think the consequences have proved to be worse than you anticipated?
That's a good question. I think that they were certainly as bad as they were certainly on the worst end of my expectations. Some of the things that happened, yeah.
So the appointment of Sir Kevin Collins was a chance, wasn't it, to help children recover and to compensate for the sacrifice that they had made, which was largely for the benefit of everyone else in society. Do you agree? Right. And Sir Kevin Collins, and we can bring this up quickly, I think, it's at INQ 000542716, page 1, please. This is a very neat visual representation of what he was suggesting by way of his recovery plan. Do you agree?
Yes, absolutely.
And the one thing that I think he placed a real premium on, and we'll come to this in terms of its cost, was adding to the time that children would have in school. Thank you, that can come down. And one of the reasons he was keen that children have time in school was because it would afford the opportunity for other enrichment activities, correct?
Absolutely.
It wasn't just getting kids back to school so that they can do maths. It was about all of the other activities that help children's development. And I think we see in Sir Kevin Collins' statement, and again, if we could bring this up briefly, please, INQ 000649897. And I think we can take it, please, from page 8. Thank you. Paragraph 3.13 and 3.14. He sets out in the course of this statement, Mr. Johnson, and I know you've seen it, about the contact he kept with you in order to be able to keep you updated with the plans that he had, correct?
That's right.
And do you accept that one of the reasons he did that was because effectively he wanted to keep you on board with them?
Yes.
And thank you, that can come down. And he sets that out. Sorry, if we could keep the statement up. He sets out from paragraph 3.23 onwards about the updating that he provided to you. It's 3.23. So he sets out here, I won't read through all of this, Mr. Johnson, but that he had sent you a note on the 26th of February, and where he had sets out here the amount of loss that school closures had produced, the economic loss. And if we could just carry on, please. At 3.24, he explains that he set out the pillars of his plan. Thank you. At 3.25, I think an endorsing note from you that you were pleased with his direction of travel. And then at 3.26 and 3.27, he explains that he also made clear the costs of his plans as well, correct?
Yes.
And I think importantly, for our purposes, he sets that out at 3.27. So in other words, on the 5th of March,
Yes.
he had provided the costings. And he explains, and again, we can take this from 3.39, please. That he sent you a note on the 14th of May setting out the overall cost of his plans, correct?
Yes.
So the maximal cost and the least cost, and I think he sets out at 3.40 that would have come as no surprise to you.
Yes.
Because he had set that out a number of months before, correct?
Yes.
And it's right, Mr. Johnson, isn't it, that after this point, the plans were steadily whittled down?
Yes, and not surprisingly, because 15.9 billion is a lot of money, but yes.
Yes, well, I think the question is, why didn't you say that in the March of 2021 when he was developing those plans?
Well, because I wanted to test his proposals, and I wanted to see the evidential basis for what he was arguing for. And you've made a point about timing and time in schools. And it's absolutely true that on the whole, the more time kids can spend in schools, the better it's going to be for them. And they'll, as you say, they will have opportunities to do things that will be of value. However, I think the overall cost of the time component of his proposals was the thick end of it. I mean, it was like 2/3, if not more, was the time. I may be wrong about that, but my memory was a huge amount went on that proposal alone. And when I dug into it, the evidence for the remedial benefits for individual kids who'd suffered detriment to their learning was not very strong. And that was the point that was put to me both by the department and by my officials.
The department, sorry, forgive me.
So I had to make a difficult choice. It's not the first time. We just spent 480 billion already on COVID. The country, even now, is struggling with a huge debt burden, which is putting up the cost of interest rates for everybody in this country. Just to throw another 10 billion on something for which the evidential basis is not very strong is not something that you should normally be doing. There was a policy in Kevin's plan, and I'm grateful to him. And I think he did it. And you know, he was doing the right thing by his profession and by his beliefs in trying to get the maximum money out of government, out of me. What he did was entirely reasonable. But my job was to try and sort out what was really practical and sensible from what was going to be very difficult in a very tough fiscal environment. And so I thought that the direct targeted teaching to try to help individuals who had fallen behind sounded like a much better use of public money. And that was what we went for. And we spent very considerable sums on that. And I think it was the right thing to do on the whole, the tutoring programme. I still think it's the right thing to do.
I mean, what he was setting out to you over the course of months was his rationale as to why he put a premium on time and why he thought it was so important that children had that extra time in school, including so that they could do enrichment activities.
Yeah, I understand.
In other words, the longer
I understand
day.
that completely, but it just didn't cohere with other advice I was being given about the benefits of the three offers.
If we just look at his resignation letter, which is at INQ 000 542974. Because it's right, isn't it, Mr. Johnson, that when he saw how much the plans had been whittled down and the amount of proposed spending, that he felt his position was untenable, correct?
Well, to be fair to Kevin, he'd done his job. You might say his position was untenable, but he was functus officio, as they say. He'd done it. You know, he produced his report, and it was very, very good. But clearly, he was aiming very high.
Well, he wasn't functus because he resigned, correct? And you had wanted him to stay on, hadn't you, and to endorse the plans?
That would have been great. But that would have been great. Yeah. So look, I mean, of course, I regret his resignation. But I mean, he'd done what I needed to do. He'd done a great deal of work, and I'm very grateful to him because he had looked genuinely and hard at how you could help kids who'd suffered from COVID. Now, I had to put that through our Minsa and work out what was really valuable and where we would end up. And the advice I was being given was that the policy with the greatest benefits was the targeted teaching.
Just looking at his resignation letter, and again, I won't read all of this out. He sets out at the third paragraph about your ambition to recover the lost learning, and sets out that he then, I think, regarded that as his responsibility to try and deliver it. That he set out in the paragraph, we see this in the paragraph below, I told you I do not believe it will be possible to deliver a successful recovery without significantly greater support than the government has to date indicated it intends to provide, and setting out his fear that it was a false economy. And then that paragraph below, I believe our approach to recovery should also offer children opportunities to re-engage with sport, music and the rich range of activities that define a great education. I proposed extending school time as a way to provide this breadth, as well as to ensure that additional academic support does not cause existing enrichment activities to be squeezed out. And then goes on to set out at the end, I suppose, the rationale for his resignation. I do not believe it's credible that a successful recovery can be achieved with a programme of support of this size.
Well, I really am grateful to Kevin for what he did, and I respect his opinion. And look, in an ideal world, clearly we would all like to see all our children better provided for all the things that he he mentions. There are huge sums that we could and probably should spend. The difficulty is that we have a very, certainly post-COVID, a very constrained fiscal position, and we have to, the government today has to be mindful of the bond markets. Why is Rachel Reeves continually talking about putting taxes up? It's because if she doesn't, the international finance will mark Britain down, and if she's seen to spend too much, they'll mark Britain down. I would love to of course, to do much more to support kids across the country, but I had to look at what was genuinely going to provide value for money, and I looked at it very hard and agreed that we could spend several billion, which we did, on tutoring, and I think help about 3 million kids, 3 million pupils, with a huge number of interventions, and really make a big difference. And actually, I think that direct tutoring, one-on-one coaching, inspiring kids in that way, can be massively, massively beneficial. And I think that it's the tutoring generally has been for too long the preserve of the ambitious parents or people with the resources to do it. And I wanted to level up. I wanted to give other kids that opportunity. And Kevin was very helpful in setting out how we could do that.
And do you accept that the package fell below what was required to really help children recover?
Look, I see why he's saying that. I don't necessarily accept that. I think that circumstances were very difficult. We had to maximise taxpayer value and deliver the best we could for kids.
Do you accept that you led Sir Kevin Collins on?
Yes.
Over a period of months?
Yes, I did. Because I wanted him to produce his wish list. I liked him. I liked him. I thought, I saw eye to eye with him on what he wanted to do in many ways, and so I wanted to hear from him what, in an ideal world, he would do, and that's what he produced. And in my view, it was simply the parts that he mentions in that letter were too expensive and didn't have the same impact as some of the other proposals.
I think what you said in a message to Miss Misra, who worked within Downing Street.
Yeah, Mirza, yeah.
Mirza, forgive me. You said to her in a message, I don't think I need to go to it, I did encourage him and allowed myself to be carried away, and he thought he was on to a big winner, correct?
That sounds like a pretty fair summary, yes.
So, I mean, for all the protestations about regret and the cost borne by children, you seem to shrug off this episode as though it were almost...
No, on the contrary. On the contrary, I think that, again, you've got an educationalist, and a passionate educationalist, whose life is dedicated to trying to secure more funding from government for what he rightly thinks are the most important objectives in life, and who's put a big project on my table with a big number attached to it. But I'm in a different position. I share his desire, but I'm limited by the position we're in, and also by the need to be mindful of taxpayer value, and frankly, to get for kids the best outcome. Because I think that, and maybe I'm wrong, but my impression was, talking to a lot of people, that the targeted teaching thing was a more effective way of helping than the timing.
Mr. Johnson, I'm going to move on. Your statement, and this is the final question I want to ask you, your statement reflects, I think, your concern or the anxiety that you have about the closures of school to most children. And you say that one of my biggest anxieties now is that I'm not sure how many lives non-pharmaceutical interventions end up saving. But reflecting on everything and in terms of the evidence that you've given today, it does seem clear that you thought that it was right to close schools to most children in March 2020 and in January 2021 because it would save lives. Is that right?
I did, and I still do. Though I think what I would now say is, and I know the inquiry will want to think about future people who find themselves in the position I was in. Given the detriments, given the suffering, given the damage, was there another way of reducing the budget of risk? Was there another thing we could have done? Was there another shot we could have played? And I don't know the answer to that. Nor can I really be certain what would have happened if we'd gone with what Gavin and the DFE wanted on January the 4th, 2021, and kept going. What would really have happened? I can't know. None of us can know. But the predictions were really grim.
My lady, those are my questions. Great.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Owen. Ms. Hannett. Ms. Hannett's just there, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, my lady.
Thank you.
Mr. Johnson, I appear on behalf of Long COVID Kids and Long COVID Kids Scotland. In the summer of 2021, at the point of preparing for the lifting of restrictions, you were advised about paediatric long COVID. You were advised several times that the rates of long COVID in children would rise. I'm going to show you one example of that advice. It's a document dated the 7th of July, prepared by the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster. If you could have that up on the screen, please. It's INQ 000607384. It's a document entitled Planning for Periods of High Prevalence. If we could go to page 3, please. Paragraph 6, Roman 1, letter D, long COVID in children. You'll see it says, children represent a large unvaccinated population. We can expect cases to rise rapidly in the group. By this point, so summer 2021, it's right that the government should have provided parents with the information it held about the accepted risk of paediatric long COVID. Instead, there was no formal announcement or advice by government given about this risk, either then or indeed at all.
Well, thank you very much, and I want to repeat my sympathies for the sufferers of long COVID, which, as everybody knows, it took me personally as Prime Minister some time to establish, and the facts about long COVID it took a while to be produced for me. And if we had this before, my lady, with the request I made for a paper on it. As for long COVID in children, I honestly don't remember being advised about the impacts of long COVID of COVID-19 in children, and I just wonder whether this sentence, the long-term impacts of COVID-19 on children are largely known, but several reports point to the existence of long COVID in children. I'm confused by that sentence. I have to.
Can I put it this way, Mr.
admit,
Johnson?
and I wonder whether it contains a mistake, because
Mr. Johnson, you'll forgive me. I've got limited time. Can I just follow up in this way? It's right that the inquiry has before it a number of pieces of advice from summer of 2021 that set out the risk of long COVID to children. The government never communicated that risk to parents in summer of 2021. Do you accept that it ought to have done so?
Well, certainly, if we had advice about the particular risks of long COVID in children, then we should have done so. All I can say is that this. I'm not quite clear what this particular sentence is saying, but I suspect that it contains a mistake, and that the word children there should be adults. But if you read
Johnson,
it,
we have to take it as it says. It says long COVID in children, doesn't it? That's the starting point of the paragraph. I think we have to accept that the person who wrote it wrote to children.
It's not quite clear what it's trying to say in that case, but yes.
My lady, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Hatt. Mr Broach. Mr Broach is over there, Mr Johnson.
Thank you, my lady. Mr Johnson, I have questions for you on behalf of the children's rights organisations. There's no doubt the government was under immense pressure in the early stages of the pandemic. But as time went on, there was space to reflect and make more considered decisions. Scotland and Wales, for example, considered the impact of non-pharmaceutical interventions on children and made decisions to exempt them from restrictions on social gatherings. In England, calls to do the same, for example, in relation to the rule of six, came from our organisations, the Children's Commissioner, and was supported by SAGE. And yet, despite there being no scientific evidence for the precise rules of six, for example, children were not exempted. And we would say this is just one example of a sustained pattern of applying the same restrictions to children in England as to adults. Would you accept the reality was the government didn't consider children as rights holders in their own right and was seeing them merely through the lens of virus transmission and prioritising enforcement of the rules?
I think that you're making a fair point about the rules generally. I think that looking back on it all, the whole lockdowns, the intricacy of the rules, the rule of six, the complexity, particularly for children, I think we probably did go too far, and it was far too elaborate. Maybe we could have found a way of exempting children. It's a very fair point.
Thank you, Mr Johnson. In his evidence yesterday, Professor Whitty described that there was a budget of allowances and it was open to the government to decide how essentially to spend those allowances. Would you accept the government should have spent more of the social allowances in relation to children rather than focusing on matters that would have benefited adults and the economy?
I do think that should be given much greater consideration. Look, I mean, I think we're going to have to, if hopefully this thing never happens again, but if we have to do anything like this again, I think we're really going to have to consider the whole NPI system, lockdowns, whether we want to go down that route at all, particularly whether we want to close schools, because, it really should be a measure of last resort. In the budget of allowances that you speak of, it should be the very last one to be spent, to be used, and we've got to find better ways of doing this.
Throughout the entire course of the pandemic, in the various measures that were taken, at no point did the government guidance ever explicitly state that children playing was considered exercise, and that parents supervising their children while playing or exercising was a valid reason to leave the house. The inquiry has heard powerful evidence from playing out in this module on this issue, including the particular difficulties for disadvantaged children, those who lacked private outdoor space. Was the impact on children's ability to play and exercise of the various rules and guidance and the disproportionate impact on disadvantaged children something that you actively considered at the time, or were you not aware of this particular problem?
Well, I certainly was aware of the particular problem of kids who didn't have access to open space, but my understanding of them, or my memory of the rules, was that you could go outside for exercise, and that applied to everybody. So I mean, forgive me if I'm misremembering something or misunderstanding your point.
The concern is that the guidance that was issued in various forms never expressly highlighted that children exercise and play very differently to adults. And
right.
So in terms of enforcement, we heard evidence, and have heard significant evidence, of children being told they couldn't be outside to play, even when they could. So was it an issue that you...
Well, that's... in that, I'm very sorry to hear that. If there was excessively officious enforcement of rules or misunderstanding of rules by those in authority, then that's plainly wrong. Children should have been... As my understanding of the rules were that children should have been allowed to exercise outdoors.
Thank you, Mr Johnson. Counsel to the inquiry asked you earlier about the lack of direct contact with children and young people. which you answered in the context of the problems with assessment grading. But children, of course, have a right to participate in all decisions affecting them under Article 12 of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. However, they were excluded from participating in press conferences throughout the pandemic, and again our organisations and the Children's Commissioner did urge government to include children's voices, but to no avail. Would you accept it was a mistake not to allow children to participate in government press conferences throughout the pandemic?
I certainly think it was a mistake, as I've told Council to the Inquiry, for us not to find some way to interact more with children, particularly those who've been affected by the exams problems. And yes, I think that's a valid criticism. We could easily have done more there, and frankly, I don't know why we didn't.
Mr. Johnson, I'm grateful. Thank you, my lady.
Thank you, Mr. Broach. Mr. Jacobs over there.
Mr. Johnson, questions on behalf of the Trades Union Congress. You've just given evidence and been asked questions about the R budget or the budget of risk and what may be the reality in a pandemic, that if school attendance is to be prioritised, that may require other parts of society to have or face greater restrictions. In August of 2020, with an R rate mercifully below 1 but precarious, and schools about to fully open and place an upward pressure on the R rate, the Eat Out to Help Out scheme encouraged significant numbers to socialise in restaurants. Rather than manage the R budget so as to facilitate school attendance and prioritise school attendance, was that an example of the government doing the opposite?
Well, it's a very fair question. I know there's been a lot of shot and shell directed at Eat Out to Help Out over the last few years. But I've got to tell you, at the time, and this is my memory of it, at the time, my memory of it is it was discussed with the scientific advisors. My memory of it is that they did know about it. I might be wrong about that, but it seems wholly unlikely to me we would have come up with a policy that was unknown to them. And I think that it was thought to be within the budget of risk. And you know, we had an economy that was really struggling.
Mr. Johnson, you may be answering questions that Mr. Keith asked you in Module 2 about the scientific advice and what have you, which I don't want to get into. I mean, yes, in simplistic terms, a national scheme to incentivise sitting in restaurants would seem, without needing terribly significant scientific acumen, to have an upward pressure on the R rate. So on this question of prioritisation, do you think actually on reflection that was the government not prioritising facilitating school attendance?
I think it's genuinely. I think it's impossible to know. I think that's the terrible reality of all these interventions is we don't know the individual value of any of them. We speak about schools being 10 to 20% or whatever, but we don't know. I think that it was felt at the time that, given where the R was, given the state of the economy, it was reasonable to proceed with Eat Out to Help Out. Would you question that in retrospect? Well, lots of people have. But what it was that actually pushed the R back over 1, who knows?
I'm going to try and deal with another topic in my time. Proactive engagement with unions in the education sector. You've been asked about a decision you made on the 6th of August 2020 to not share contingency plans. Realistically, Mr. Johnson, is that not the antithesis of having constructive and mature engagement with a sector that was responsible for educating children?
The decision was not to prevent the contingency plans from being circulated at any stage. The decision was just to hold it back until such time as we really needed to go with it. and I'm sure that the unions and the schools would have been more than capable when the moment came of rising to it and dealing with it. But if I'm sure everybody remembers at the time there was some politics in the whole question of whether schools were safe, and I thought it was important to get kids back into school and to have some forward momentum, and that was the objective.
Mr. Johnson, is it not the case that contingency planning was needed at that time? Because just as you and your government can see a fraught winter, school leaders can see a winter fraught with difficulty and having to teach in different ways, trying to support vulnerable children in very difficult circumstances. They need to be equipped.
Yes, but the contingency you're talking about is closing schools.
Well, I think it's a whole variety of contingencies, actually, that the Department of Education...
No, this particular contingency was closing schools.
I think that's my time. Thank you, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jacobs. Ms. Beattie, who's just there.
Mr. Johnson, I ask questions on behalf of National Disabled People's Organisations. Yes. On the 18th of March 2020, the day that you announced school closures, the COBRA meeting was informed of SAGE modelling, which assumed that schools should be kept partially open to ensure that key workers could continue to contribute to the national effort. As at 18th of March, you tell us in your statement, you had no doubt that if schools closed, it would be devastating, and you were under no illusions that it would hurt the most vulnerable the most. At the COBRA meeting, in summing up, you said that a minimal school service should be made available for the children of key workers and for vulnerable children. But the actions of the COBRA meeting were to agree a list of key workers. No actions from the meeting concerned vulnerable children. Now, Mr. Johnson, I'm sure you'll agree that actions speak louder than words. Do you agree that as at the 18th of March 2020, there should have been more focus and more action on the social care, health and therapy needs of disabled children and young people, given school closures would have an immediate and devastating impact on the provision of care and support to meet those needs?
Thank you very much. I'm sure that the department was looking at the needs of the vulnerable kids, including disabled kids, because that is spelt out in that document that I relied on so extensively to show that they were indeed mindful of the problems that they were going to encounter or they would encounter in closing schools. So,
Mr. Johnson,
what I'm trying to say is it wasn't. Your question to me is, was it why weren't we as a government taking more account of this? As far as I can tell, we were.
And so that is the paper which Council of the Inquiry took you to before of the 15th of March, the citing note, where you agreed that there was nothing of substance on vulnerable children and support and services for vulnerable children, that the paper didn't deal with that. Is that correct?
No, my impression was that it did mention vulnerable children. I don't have it before me now, but I remember it. I think it mentioned them.
It mentioned them and it had nothing of substance, and you agreed when Ms Dobbin put it to you earlier that it did have nothing on substance on vulnerable children. Is that right?
Well, I honestly, if that's what I don't remember saying that to Mrs Dobbin, but perhaps I did agree with her assertion. All I can say is that if you look at that paper, it contains a reference to the needs of vulnerable children, and perhaps we could have done more, and I'm more willing to accept that there were lessons we could have learned, and more we could have done. But it struck me then that was a pretty comprehensive list of the issues that the department faced.
So it may have been a list of the issues, but what concrete measures did you put in place, or did you know were being put in place at the time to avert what you say you knew then was an immediate and devastating impact which would hurt the most vulnerable the most?
Well, as far as I can remember, the most important thing we did was to try to keep schools open. Right, that was our best answer.
Can you name anything else more specific than that?
And to make sure that in the event of closures, that all the packages available for the support of vulnerable children, disabled children in particular, were still available to them. Now, how exactly that was going to be done was clearly a matter for the relevant departments.
So, Mr Johnson, your answer seems to amount to the fact that you are taking steps to try to keep schools open. Is it in fact the case
Yes.
that the government's primary concern at that time was to make provision of a minimal school service for the children of key workers with insufficient focus on the needs of vulnerable children?
I honestly,
children?
I doubt very much that we ignored the interests of vulnerable children. I really do. But it's now so long ago that I'd have to go back over the papers and look and see what we put in place.
Nothing springs to mind.
Well, not at this stage, and not without, I'm afraid, without notice of your question. But I'd be happy to write to you.
Thank you, Ms Beattie. Mr Wagner, who's that way?
Good afternoon, Mr Johnson. I act for clinically vulnerable families. I want to ask you first about a message that you sent to Gavin Williamson on the 6th of July 2020. This is referred to at paragraph 48 of your statement. And you were asking about why school numbers, people returning to schools, seemed low. And he replied, noting that all schools were open and referring to the need to push on compulsory attendance and the message of normality. And you said, I encouraged him to continue the job. I just want to ask you about that message of normality. Would you agree, July 2020, this is months before the vaccine was widely available, was available at all? Do you agree?
Yes, that's right. Yes, so I think we were starting to get inklings of it quite early on. Yes,
but there was no mass testing at that stage.
No.
So would you recognise that at that stage in July 2020, for many children and young people, things couldn't go back to normal yet because they still needed to either shield to protect themselves or a clinically vulnerable member of their family living in their home?
Sure.
You referred before to Mr. Jacobs about forward momentum, about trying to sort of build forward momentum. Do you think that in that race to return to normality in that summer of 2020, clinically vulnerable families may have been left behind?
I think, on the contrary, that getting back to school, had we been able to do it in a thoroughgoing way, would have been the best thing for all children, young people, clinically vulnerable or not. Because I think that it would have restored the environment that was best able to look after them, and that it had many advantages trying to keep the schools open.
But only if they could return safely. Is that fair?
Sure, but it was my view that schools should be made as safe as possible, and if they were safe, the kids should go back.
But in schools, it wasn't always possible to enforce social distancing or have, particularly in the older buildings, good ventilation or enough space, was it?
No, it was very tricky, but the schools did a remarkable job, and one of the reasons why we staggered the return in June of 2020 was precisely because we couldn't get everybody back in at once.
But the result of that, wasn't it, that it was sometimes not safe for clinically vulnerable children or children who might take COVID back to their clinically vulnerable family members to return?
Well, I think that there was always going to be an argument against reopening schools from that position, that you were going to create a situation in which vulnerable parents would be exposed to the virus picked up by kids in schools. And that was the argument for closing schools, sure. But in the end, we had to decide whether that argument trumped the interests of the kids or not, and whether we could nonetheless get the R down below 1.
Just finally on that, I'm not actually asking about the decision to reopen schools for everybody. I'm asking about, for this specific subgroup, for clinically vulnerable children and children who lived in clinically vulnerable families. Do you understand why, at that point, many of those people will have felt it was safer to educate their children at home rather than send their children back to school?
I can see why they might have felt as they did, but clearly I thought it was best for everybody if they could get back to school, and I wanted schools to be as safe as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Wagner. That completes the questions we have for you, Mr. Johnson, apart from one from me. There are a number of people who've been making submissions and asking questions during the course of this module who believe, and there's a perception that the interests of children, well, generally, not just the loss of learning, weren't taken into account. Just putting that to one side at the moment, I haven't made any findings as yet. But if there were anything in that perception, as somebody who's got a lot of experience of working in government and, of course, leading the UK government as Prime Minister, could a Minister for Children, taking it as away from just one government department, education, could a system of a Minister for Children work, and would it work?
I've thought about that, my lady, and I wondered about whether to create another ministerial function. I think another department, another set of civil servants, and so on. I have thought about it, and clearly there is an interest. We have a minister for women. We have all sorts of groups represented. I think, given how much we've heard today about the Department of Education's desire to keep proper desire to keep schools open and to represent the interests of children and young people, I think on the whole I would apply Occam's razor to this one, and just I would probably keep it with DFE.
But
because I think in the end the parents should be responsible for children, is what I would say. Maybe an old-fashioned view, but that's what I would say.
But the interests of children cross government departments, don't they? So, for example, detained children would be Home Office.
Yeah, I mean, that is true. Look, I'm not.
You're not.
I'm not remotely hostile to the idea. I just think you've got to think very hard before you create new departments, divisions, new roles in government. We've seen already throughout this debate, how fractious and difficult it becomes when different ministerial interests start to collide, and we've got quite enough around the table on a subject like this. That's what I would say.
That completes the questions we have for you, therefore, Mr. Johnson, and that completes the assistance that you're going to have to give the inquiry.
Sorry, I'm so sorry.
I think you did that last time too. I think you're obviously in a great rush to leave me.
Sorry, it's like when the speaker stands up at the end of PMQs, you just run for it. That's what.
Understood.
Sorry.
I appreciate you didn't intend any discourtesy.
Sorry, forgive me.
No, don't worry.
Forgive me.
Anyway, thank you very much indeed for the help that you've given to the inquiry. That's it.
Thank you so much, my name.
Thank you. I shall return at 1:55 to 2:00.
All rise. Johnson there today very firmly coming back and saying he disagreed with those accounts. He talked about how there was planning for school closures in terms of conversations with SAGE, the Scientific Advisory, that hearing had been discussed a lot that's happened as well. So he really said that he did remember it being discussed, that the Department of Education was discussing it, and almost that it was almost assumed that they were doing something about it. Previously, the Department of Education said they hadn't been specifically told to come up with an contingency plan. So a lot has been said. There's plenty more summaries on our website to go through all of what the review is finished. Yeah. Right, if he comes out, where am I ducking? That there. Down here. Do you want to next side? If it starts to fall, just grab this to cover it. Thanks.
Mark, you just gonna far from here or just gonna go for a coffee? Stay at the station. There's a Costa. It's only 5-minute walk. But there's no rush. Yeah, we'll just go there. I mean, I'm tempted to even just jump on the Bakerloo line and do it. Yeah, because I'll go home. I'm not far, but I might go to the Costco. Yeah. Was that exact?
Time continues to be in hindsight.
I'm right up. Well, it is.
shout when I've got it.
Turn it up gently.
Yeah.
There's your volume. I'll let you adjust to.
Can't hear anything right now.
Oh, really? I can. No. I could. You know, that was all there.
Oh yeah, and then we've got.
Yeah, sticky stick might suit these.
Yeah. Hi. Okay. 10 past. Yeah. Okay, you're very quiet at the program, just so you know.
I'm sorry.
Do you want me to love that? Well, I can do a line, instead to one side. So just one shopping trolley? Yeah.
Do you mind sideways like that?
No, I don't.
Yeah.
Because I just think then if someone tells me, if you tell me, I just need something in my eye line.
I'll go.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. And then I would think
why at times
away
emotions
and get another shot and then step back in. Okay?
out of the inquiry room. He was in tears.
No, just to cover our backs.
A member of your Boris families here to bear witness to Boris Johnson's testimony, and this is we're at the stage 8 module of the long-running inquiry.
I know that so well.
Children and young people, and of course, at the time and in hindsight for many years since, one of the most controversial elements of the way the government responded, one of the aspects of lockdown, was the decision to
I won't pivot like that.
Very
And then I'll keep my left foot in place.
children and young people, particularly their mental
No, years on the...
their education. Some of the themes that we picked up today, of course, was around that initial decision to close schools en masse in March 2020, and also the issues around the way exams were issued, raising the controversial algorithm in the summer of 2020, and then that following year, right at the start of 2021, the flip-flopping between reopening and then suddenly pulling the rug away from the students and teachers and schools closing caps just today. All these and more came up today. Now, Boris Johnson stressed that the closure of schools he always saw as a nightmare scenario. But we have heard previously in the session here at the COVID inquiry criticism leveled towards him, towards the government, for the lack, apparently, of planning towards for that potential possibility of schools having to close. We knew the pandemic was spreading around the world. Former Education Secretary Sir Gavin Williamson, for example, has criticised Number 10 for moving too slowly. And the former Department for Education School Director General as well, Sir Jim Coles, he actually claimed it was an extraordinary dereliction of duty of the Department for Education to have not planned for school closures sooner than March 2020. This is something Boris Johnson denied here today, that language certainly, saying he had assumed the language would have made it clear to the Department for Education that school closures were a potential possibility for it. We also heard about the algorithm, that decision to downgrade exam results in the summer of 2020. Boris Johnson actually at times getting quite touchy there. He described it all as a disaster, but it was a really difficult thing to try and manage. And we saw those WhatsApp messages between himself and Dominic Cummings that summer, and he described himself as in a homicidal mood thanks to the exam results. We have to tell you also learned that at the point Boris Johnson was even considering sacking his education secretary, Gavin Williamson. Finally, we also heard about that
And just, I'll just pivot out
January 2021.
If Boris Johnson comes out, I will just slightly pivot out and then pivot back in. Okay?
Throughout his evidence here today, he said it was about trying to be the best
That's what
he didn't put it as a position. He said really, there was no suffering as a result of that, and it was just about trying to grapple with the
No, no. Well, we are waiting for Boris Johnson to lead the COVID inquiry in the building behind me, having completed his testimony this morning. This is the last time he will be called here. The main subject of this morning was school closures, although he also faced questions about why he didn't fully fund the recovery programme for children and their education that he had invited Kevin Collins to put in place for them, which would have included extra time and extra activities. He said that he thought it just wasn't justified and that he wanted to concentrate his efforts on tutoring. But what was most striking was the glimpse we got into the tensions at the heart of the government. Last week we saw an expletive-filled message from Gavin Williamson. Today, Boris Johnson saying he wanted ministers at the Department for Education to be sacked, saying we cannot go on like this.
You've got a card in stream. Yes.
As he comes out. Yeah. I'll take my... Well, it's not till quarter past. Yeah.
We'll just see how it goes. You've got to do the live one.
I think it's streaming anyway. They're quite good at holding. Just give me a bit more freedom. Give me not like it's give me the earphones back. I was hoping he'd come out.
Cards are coming.
Yeah, the cards coming.
Yeah.
I just rolled on.
Yeah, I'm rolled. wanted to make sure she thought I was the security threat. Anyway, yeah, how many weeks have you? I thought you weeks. Oh, so you're over halfway. So Rachel used to be at LBC. She was my main contact there. How many years ago now was that? So yeah, so right. Was it? No, yeah. Before the actual inquest, we were there. Yeah.
I'm Rachel, sorry.
Yeah, Rachel Benville. She used to do what Henry Riley does now.
Yes.
Yeah, I think Henry does what
Yes.
you do now.
Yeah, he's
Yeah,
far more stunts than
I know. Congratulations to you and hubby. I feel like I've seen you before on stages when you got married. Oh wow. Right. Yeah, apparently he's going to come back. But they all went in and they said he didn't apologise, he didn't do anything. Blah, blah. But I knew he was going to do it. She warned me that he's going to look at this step in his car. Yeah. Yeah, okay, let's go.
Ms Kieran.
My Lady, may I please call Sir Matthew Rycroft, CBE?
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly
declare and affirm
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
So Matthew, I hope you won't take it personally that most people seem to have cleared off.
That's fine by me.
Thank you. My Lady, I should state at the outset that this evidence session may be distressing to observers in that it includes discussion of the abuse of children, including through sexual abuse and violence. So Matthew, we understand that you served as the Permanent Secretary at the Home Office from the 23rd of March 2020 until March 2025. Is that right?
It is.
Thank you. So, Matthew, you have provided a witness statement for the inquiry on behalf of the Home Office. I think you have it in front of you, and the reference we have for it is INQ 000474944. So, Matthew, that is a detailed and wide-ranging statement, and we read from it that you have been assisted in its drafting by a number of officials in your department, so that where you do not have direct personal knowledge of all events covered in it, you are satisfied that you're nonetheless able to provide accurate evidence on behalf of the department. Is that right?
That's right, and I want to thank them very much for their support.
Thank you. And with that in mind, and noting that you signed it on the 18th of February 2025, can you please confirm that the contents of that statement are true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
I can.
Thank you. We know, Sir Matthew, from that statement that the Home Office had responsibility for a number of issues that impacted children during the pandemic. And for our purposes today, those include responsibility for tackling all forms of child sexual abuse and sexual exploitation, including online abuse. Is that right?
That's right.
And responsibility for crime and policing that includes issues related to the physical abuse of children, violence against women and girls, and child criminal exploitation, such as county lines.
That's right.
And responsibilities also for child migrants, including unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. Is that right?
That's right.
Thank you. And is it right that a large part of that business would come into the portfolio of the Minister for Safeguarding, who for the first part of the pandemic was Victoria Atkins, and that some of it would have come into the portfolio of the Minister for Crime and Policing, who was Kit Malthouse?
That's right. And I should also mention the two different ministers for migration as well in relation to unaccompanied asylum-seeking children.
Thank you. So, Matthew, a theme that you returned to several times in your statement, and which is also apparent in the exhibits you provided, is that to meet those responsibilities, the Home Office needed to work closely with other government departments. Most obviously, perhaps there's an overlap, isn't there, between the Home Office's obligations relating to safeguarding children through the prevention of crime and the Department for Education's obligations for safeguarding through children's social work and schools. Is that right?
That's right. And there are lots of other government departments that the Home Office work very closely with in relation to preventing crime. And not just government, of course, the operational partners, policing being the most obvious, but also the voluntary sector, working very closely with a lot of non-governmental organisations and charities, tech companies, and multiple other partners.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you, Sir Matthew, please, to just slow down a little bit when you give your answers for the transcript. Given the importance of that work with other departments, would it be right to assume that prior to the pandemic, there were established mechanisms for cooperating, particularly with the Department for Education?
Yes. They came into their own during the pandemic, but they existed beforehand and, of course, continue to this day.
Thank you.
Some of them are sort of set in stone and are everlasting. Others can get created in order to deal with a particular situation.
Thank you. I think we'll come to explore some of that in a bit more detail. Can we look, please, at paragraph 49 of your statement? You said a moment ago that the Home Office liaises with a number of departments, and I think we see an illustration of that here. And we see, if we can please just scroll slowly down so that we're able to look at the range of these to paragraph 50, where we read that these shared responsibilities were established before 2020 and did not change because of the pandemic. So can we take it both in ordinary times and in the pandemic? Home Office officials are working very frequently on many different aspects of Home Office work relating to children across this wide range of departments.
Yes, that's absolutely right. The Department for Education would sort of be holding the ring, holding the sort of central policy responsibility, working very closely with the Home Office and other departments.
Thank you. And others that we see there, for example, are the Department for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport, and Department for Levelling Up, which I think we've been referring to as the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government. Were there established mechanisms for working with those departments as well, or did they tend to be ad hoc and project-based?
A mixture. In relation to the ringed departments, the DCMS and what was then DLUC, there were both sort of bilateral arrangements between the Home Office and each of those, and then multilateral arrangements involving a number of departments altogether.
Thank you, Sir Matthew. That can come down. We'll come back to explore how some of that worked during the pandemic in due course. If we can begin then thinking about March 2020, you will know, Sir Matthew, that some witnesses have suggested to the inquiry that there was a lack of focus on the implications of the pandemic for vulnerable children prior to the 18th of March across government. And in that context, can we please look at INQ 000518565? This is an internal Home Office email dated the 16th of May, beg your pardon, the 16th of March. And I think, Sir Matthew, noting as we did that you took up your role on the 23rd of March, please do let me know if any of my questions are outside of your knowledge about this. This email thread sets out what are described as takeaways on the Home Secretary's part following a COBRA meeting that day. If we can look, please, at that first paragraph, we read that the Home Secretary is concerned about vulnerable children not being taken into account properly by other government departments. She feels vulnerable people at the moment is taken to almost solely mean the elderly, pregnant women, and those with underlying health conditions. Her worry is that if schools are forced to close long-term, beyond normal holiday lengths, then there will be no external support and monitoring for kids from troubled homes, and we see in brackets drug abuse, CSE, etc. Secretary of State for Department for Education didn't really seem to take this on board, or at least didn't have a solid response to the challenge. Home Secretary wants the department to push DFE on taking this into consideration, and if necessary, we will lean in further via number 10, as she has strong thoughts on this issue. Would it be right then that the request to her officials arising from this is that Home Office officials should pick this up with officials from the Department for Education, and if that didn't allay concerns, then to pick it up further with number 10? Is that right?
That's absolutely right, and officials did follow up that instruction, of course, and so did the Minister who you've already referred to, Vicky Atkins. So she engaged very directly with her officer number in the Department for Education at ministerial level, bearing in mind the Home Secretary's and indeed, I think, the Home Office's strong concerns about what happens when schools are closed.
Thank you. Let's take that stage by stage then. Your first answer was that officials did pick that up with officials from the DFE. If we can scroll up, please, to page 1 of this document, we see what that feedback was when it was circulated within the Home Office. We see, in conjunction with SOCG colleagues, I may need your help at several points with these acronyms, Sir Matthew, but I think that is Serious Organised Crime Group colleagues. Thank you.
Correct.
We have been in contact with DFE at official level this morning. Broadly, they advise that there is significant activity being undertaken to protect vulnerable children from harm. So it seems that this level of detail hadn't been exposed or briefed to the DFE SOS before COBRA. Can we look then under the heading Summary as follows? I think I understand that this is what Department for Education officials were telling Home Office officials that they were doing on these topics. We see a wide range of actions in hand to support local authorities to deal with COVID-19 and ensure that vulnerable children are protected from harm. The examples given then are suspending routine Ofsted inspections, supporting LAs to ensure workforce contingencies are as comprehensive as possible, providing guidance to LAs to enable them to interpret Public Health England guidance, and the examples given in that respect are about isolation in children's homes, foster families or residential schools, a query about cocooning for vulnerable children, a query about protective clothing, and support in respect of unaccompanied asylum-seeking children who appear symptomatic. Now, Sir Matthew, if we can just remind ourselves that the concern the Home Secretary had been expressing was about whether if schools closed, there would be external support and monitoring for kids from troubled homes. She specifically cited drug abuse and child sexual exploitation. Were these points that were being raised here in this email directly relevant to those issues?
Yes, I think they were relevant to those issues. And of course, the decision when it came to close schools was, of course, with the exception of vulnerable children. So
it
schools
was.
remain.
If I can just pause you there, this is, of course, the 16th and 17th, well, in fact, this is the 16th of March and the 17th of March. So before that decision was made.
Yes.
The points in this email, are the points coming back to the Home Office from the Department for Education, were not really about school closures. There isn't any indication here about vulnerable children being allowed to go to school.
I see what you mean, and I agree. I think these are points which the Department for Education told the Home Office in the week before, or in the run-up to the decision and announcement on schools being closed. So these were actions in hand in advance of any decision to close schools.
Yes. So I think my question is, given the specificity of the Home Secretary's concerns and the fact that these are not really going to the point of school closure, was this reassuring to the Home Office, or did the Home Office still have concerns that there was this gap that the Home Secretary had identified?
Well, I wasn't myself at the Home Office at that time, as you have said, but from reading the documents available in preparation for this inquiry, I can tell that the ongoing concern of the Home Secretary and the Home Office was that DfE needed to do more than they were doing in order to protect vulnerable children. That was an ongoing concern, and this bit of feedback in response to one moment in time, an instruction from the Home Secretary, was just a one-off. There would have been multiple other engagements at official and ministerial level between the two departments.
Yes, thank you. I think we'll come to some of those other instances. Just staying with this particular moment in time for now, the reason I ask this question about the 17th of March is because we have heard from other witnesses that the Department for Education had not undertaken any planning or assessment related to the implications specifically of school closures prior to the 17th of March. And it seems from this email chain that by the 16th of March, the Home Office had started to probe some of those issues. And I'm wondering whether the response perhaps revealed some gaps in that planning that caused any alarm in the Home Office, given that overlap for safeguarding children.
Well, what I can say is that the Home Office's concern, the Home Secretary's concern in general, was not fully met by this set of responses, and so we continued. The Home Office continued to engage with the Department for Education at all levels to make our concerns clear. And the reason that we had concerns was that we knew what happened to levels of domestic abuse, to levels of child sexual exploitation when schools are closed, because that's what's happened in every holiday. And you can see from the crime trends that there are upticks in relation to those sorts of crimes when children are not going to school.
And given the Home Office had that knowledge and that school closures clearly were very much on the table at this stage, can you help us to understand this? It's also clear from your statement that the Home Office had not itself conducted any planning or impact assessment